But one of our funding partners for the ballot box, Star Ghana Foundation, has been speaking. They get a lot of their funding, well, not a lot, all their funding from Europe mainly. And the COVID-19 has hit hard on their funding partners. This has led to some cuts. They've cut down on projects. They're still very passionate about funding election projects to give a voice to the voiceless in particular. I sat down recently with the executive director of Star Ghana Foundation, Alhaji Tanko. Here's the conversation.
We are likely to be working with not more than 10.
Wow.
Yeah, at both.
Wow.
But we hope that the 4 would enable us, the 10 would enable us to drill deeper, to go deeper on the issues.
How painful is it reducing 26 to about 10?
Well, it's painful at all levels because all the 26 that we're supporting are very interesting projects and have something to contribute to the ultimate objective of
Thank you for your time. You're arguably, in terms of Star Ghana and Star Ghana Foundation, one of the biggest spenders when it comes to elections with regards election-related activities to get citizens active ahead of the elections and during and after the elections. I wonder how much of a blow COVID-19 has hit in terms of your activities. So perhaps, first of all, let's go through the calendar for this year's election.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and a pleasure to be here. Star Ghana has been supporting civil society and in some cases election management bodies around, the elections, post-election transition since 2012. We supported the 2012 elections, including the presidential debates. We supported actions around the Supreme Court adjudication, and, awareness creation, conflict prevention, etc. We supported 2016, including the debates and the evening encounters, and we are supporting the 2020. But the scale of funding, the number of organizations has dipped. Partly because of the impact of COVID on the funding available to us. But also, COVID has affected the timelines for implementation. During the lockdown, all our activities ceased, and then most of the projects are rushing to catch up because the election funding is not just on election day, but we have the the election itself, and then the post.
Okay. So how much of a difference is 2020, apart from COVID, in terms of the activities? Because obviously we've come a long way.
Yes.
What was supposed to be different about 2020 if you compare it to 2012 and 2016?
Well, I think each election has its own dynamics. And I think, so for 2012, for example, part of the focus was on inclusion, getting the voices and participation of excluded social groups, women, young people, persons with disabilities. So we're looking at the accessibility ramps, we're looking at the tactile ballots, etc. 2016 had a different focus. And for 2020, I think the overriding concerns have been one, around the issue of vigilantism or anti-vigilantism, conflict prevention. It has been around the issue of getting more women and persons with disability as political actors, not just in terms of voters or citizens. And then there's the whole issue around, having two a former president, a certain president contesting each other, and how that plays out. So those have been the kinds of dynamics.
So in all, how many projects, for instance, were you funding?
Okay. So for 2020, we started with 26 projects: media, civil society, faith-based organizations, etc. And the funding for the first phase was £750,000. The first phase ran from, I think, October 2019.
Okay.
And ended in July 2020.
Okay.
The second phase starts in September 2020 and ends in February 2021. However, following COVID, the impact on the donor countries, the re-strategizing by our main donor, UK, in terms of their priorities and etc., the quantum of funding for the election 2020 for the second phase has reduced from 750,000 to 250,000 pounds. Wow. So almost 150,000.
That's a drastic reduction.
150% cut. And so we've had to re-strategize. We will no longer be able to continue with the 26 projects into the phase 2. And we need to scale down. So our work would primarily focus in this second phase on 1, anti-vigilantism and conflict prevention, 2, the citizens' engagement with the candidates. So we're looking at the presidential debates, we're looking at some of the work we're doing with the media around the ballot box, for example, reporting on conditions in the deprived areas. The third area would be on the elections monitoring. So our work with CODEO, pre and post and during and post the elections. And then the fourth area would be around the post-election transition. So those are the areas we focus. So from 26 partners, we are likely to be working with not more than 10.
Wow.
Yeah, at both.
Wow.
But we hope that the 4 would enable us, the 10 would enable us to drill deeper, so to go deeper on the issues.
How painful is it reducing 26 to about 10?
Well, it's painful at all levels because all the 26 that we're supporting are very interesting projects and have something to contribute to the ultimate objective of credible, transparent, and peaceful elections. So to have to cut some of that out means making some choices and decisions that which one should I cut and etc. But I think at the partner level, some of the partners had set up for 1 year, 1.5 year projects, maybe have recruited staff and etc. And then suddenly, bam, we have to cut, but we don't have any. Just before this interview, I was actually sending a mail out to the partners to tell them that get ready.
That's painful. Yes. But I guess because of COVID-19, most of them would be expecting this anyway.
Yes, and most of them were also a bit behind in implementation because during the lockdown, nothing could happen. Post the election, post the lockdown, we tried not to take the national attention away from the immediate response to COVID. And so we asked our partners to kind of hold on the contentious issues and see how we can mobilize the whole country around confronting COVID.
I remember describing Star Ghana, not the foundation, as a basket where partners would contribute into it and then you would in turn also distribute what you get. Explain where you get your funding from.
Okay, so the Star Ghana program is a basket fund. Basket fund meaning that a number of donors put their money into a basket and then contracts a service provider to manage it on their behalf. So if in the previous situation, multimedia may be reporting to both the EU, Danida, DFID, but under the basket fund, you report to us and we report to the donors, So for the phase 1 of the Star Ghana program, we had the USAID, DFID, UK, that's Danida, and then the EU. For the second phase, we had the DFID, EU, and Danida funding the program. Our elections call is funded by DFID and the European Union. The media has dropped out.
Okay. Yeah. I didn't hear any local partners. I haven't had any local partners partnering with the Star Ghana Foundation, for instance.
Exactly. And I think that given the choices that we've had to make, given the centrality of credible and peaceful elections for our whole development, I think it's a pity that such work is funded by outsiders, in quotes, even if we describe them as our development partners. Some of these areas that are critical to our development need to be funded locally. Locally in the sense that even if it is 10 cedis, you text 1 cedi, 5 cedis, etc., it helps, you know. And so one of the key objectives of the Star Ghana Foundation is really to promote active citizenship and local philanthropy. So we are trying to see how we can pilot some ways of supporting our local development initiatives. Because whether we like it or not, post-COVID, we aren't going to go back to the earlier or the status quo where development partners were putting in money and etc. I mean, we aren't going to that. So how to do that? And we do have examples of local philanthropy that we can build on and to use that to support, you know, our efforts towards inclusive development.
Because we're here, for instance, with the reduction in how much you're spending, you know, cutting from 700 to about 200 and something, mainly because the partners are Europeans.
Yes.
And COVID also hit them really hard.
Exactly.
They're still recovering.
Yes.
And they're having to deal with a second leg of even the COVID-19.
Exactly.
So obviously they'll be looking at their countries first before they extend the hand to ours.
Yes.
So it's important that we also begin to do something.
Extremely.
But we're also battling with the COVID, even here in Ghana.
Yes. So the Star Ghana Foundation is currently supporting 8 strategic partners around COVID response and recovery. Response, looking at the immediate responses, mitigating the impacts on vulnerable groups and etc. Recovery, looking at, so what should we do about education? What should we do about the health systems? First, to cope with future pandemics, but also to ensure that some people are not left out. Because if you take the education system, there is a movement towards the incorporation of online learning, teaching and learning. But that discriminates against children from poor backgrounds, children from communities that do not have access to internet, you know. And so that you are immediately, you know, deepening the inequality. You've seen pictures carried in the media of some communities where people have to climb trees in order to get, you know, access for telephone calls. So what are the implications and what do we need to do? COVID has changed forever how the education and health systems will, you know, function. We can either take that as given or proactively seek to influence the conversations and etc. So Star Ghana is providing support on that. But again, the support is coming from DFID and the European Union. And again, we're saying that let's see what models there are that we can develop to assess, for us to contribute, even if it is 1 cedi each, to say, look, we text 1 cedi into a fund that is used to mitigate. And we have demonstrated over 10 years of managing more than $70 million of donor grants that the foundation is a credible, you know, institution. It has the wherewithal and the capacity to manage this, and its ability to account, you know. And so how we do that, I know there's a healthy mistrust of, you know, CSOs in general. So how do we ensure that the accounts for the monies, how do we ensure that the money doesn't end up in the purchase of 4-wheel drives, whatever. And so that's what I'm saying, that we need to test models where the donation is for a specific purpose and the accountability mechanisms are clearly agreed upon. And I was mentioning to you before we came on air that we're even looking at, the lynching, the violence against women in the name of witchcraft and etc. That if we close the homes and the communities are not yet willing to accept them, or a woman feels threatened and has to be moved out of the community, where does she go? So can we put money together and set up, safe holding centers that, a woman who is threatened can, be moved to whilst the police, etc., seek to resolve it. That is a very specific project. The results will be tangible for everybody to see, and the accountability will not be. So we're not going to be asking people to fund fluffy, vague distance or help to improve empowerment or whatever, but very specific things that we can do.
Okay. So how hard, when it comes to the general picture, have you been hit because of COVID?
COVID, okay.
Yes.
I think when I speak and I say we, I'll be referring to not just the foundation, but civil society in general. And I think civil society has been hard hit. So starting from Star Ghana Foundation, COVID has seen, or the impact of COVID has seen a reduction, a very significant reduction in the amount of money available for the projects that we're implementing, mainly the elections and the COVID response projects. For wider civil society, the impact has been, one, the drying up of funds. But secondly, for some of the donors, some didn't cut funding, but they reprogrammed funds. So if they gave you maybe 1 million cedis to work on, gender issues, then they ask you to reprogram or repurpose the 1 million and commit that to COVID activities. So we've seen a shifting of priorities away from equally important issues to a focus on COVID. And
what's the danger there?
The danger is that the other problems don't run out, they don't disappear because of COVID. Malaria has not disappeared, cholera has not disappeared. We saw what happened with the CSM, that but for the fact that CSOs and the media took it up, it was almost going under the radar, and yet, more people were even dying of CSM in the private areas. So the impact has been that we sweep some of the issues under the carpet, focus on COVID, and by the time our attention turns to those ones, the issues may have been compounded. So for Star Ghana, I think there's the issue one of the reduction of funding. There is the issue of adjusting to the new protocols. So you cannot bring people together as you used to. And yet most of the constituency we've been working with have been people in the communities who do not have access to Zoom and Teams and Blue Jeans and the other.
Who cannot even social distance.
Exactly, so how do you work with them? And that might affect also the way you are able to mobilize them to take action on issues that affect them. So those are the 3 areas that we affected: the funding, the repurposing or reprogramming away from equally important areas, and then the ways of working, where we tend to disadvantage communities and social groups that do not have access to internet or cannot social distance,
Okay. What's the Ghana Foundation's focus right now?
I think we continue to focus on contributing towards credible, peaceful, and inclusive elections. So, peaceful, the work on anti-vigilantism, conflict prevention, and resolution. And so we're doing that at the national level and, a few of the hotspots, including the monitoring of the use of incendiary language and etc. that we've done right from 2012 in partnership with the media and other organizations. We're looking at citizens' engagement with the candidates to ensure a focus on the issues. So we are hoping, we're working with GBC, the National Commission for and NCC, and a number of partners to see if we can first organize the presidential and vice presidential debates.
Okay.
And also the evening encounters, where you have one-on-one encounters between the presidential candidates and, you know, citizens, whether in a studio or wherever. And the third, looking at, you know, engagements with candidates at the parliamentary level,
okay,
building on what we're doing with multimedia, TV3, and the others.
Okay. What we've done recently with Imani Africa is also to put a focus on the independent candidates,
yes,
and those that don't have that massive support like the NDC and the NPP.
Yes. And then the third one is that, you know, we focus on the voting, the elections, but we tend to lose sight of the, what I'll call the environmental issues, the, in quotes, the ecosystem around which the elections are conducted. Campaign financing has gone crazy. It disadvantages poor people. It's, you know, shifts the focus around the best candidates to the ones with the deep pockets. So that's one area. The transitions, despite the fact that we have a Transitions Act, think of a transition that hasn't been marred by all these things about people have taken cars, this thing has happened, the handover, and etc. What do we do about that? The third area, elections management. We've seen the way in which the changes in the leadership of the EC played out. You know, is there anything that can be done about it? What other constitutional issues need to be done? So we'll be convening dialogues.
Okay.
So those will not be projects with partners, but dialogues across the length and breadth of the country on these issues. We've just completed one on the campaign financing. We had dialogues in Tamale, in Kumasi, in Cape Coast, and then we had the Accra one.
Are we close to finding a solution?
Well, I don't think the solution would come like this because the vested interests are too many. But once we keep that conversation on the front burner, we should be able to mobilize enough citizens to demand action. Because some of the candidates are hurting, but they can't come out to say we are hurting. But I think if citizens say this is not the election that we want, why should maybe 200 people choose a candidate that's maybe 1 million people will be voting for? You know, how do we reform those ones? So election campaign finance, it looks simple, but it has ramifications in all areas. But we need to have those conversations. So we will be having convenings, or we'll be hosting convenings on these issues, possibly in partnership with the media. And
great.
Others, yeah.
Just wanted to say that you should be happy with the manifestos, at least right now. The focus is not on insults, at least.
Yes.
We've got issues, real issues that we can talk about and make comparisons. The only issue with that, I guess, for some of us is the manifesto has become the national development plan, and it's a political party's manifesto. So where does that leave the national development plan itself? I guess maybe going forward, that's also another area that you can pay attention to.
We are working with the University of Ghana Law School, hosting a series of webinars around, you know, elections. We had one on the manifestos. I think there's another one on campaign finance. We've also worked with the Northern Development Forum to look at how they can influence the manifestos to also focus on the issues of inequality and etc. So that's what we're doing in that area. But I think the manifestos, one area again is for citizens to pay attention. One is in the development of the manifestos, but a second is the accountability for the manifestos. When you win, do you get to pick and choose which parts of the manifesto, or we can hold you accountable? You know, so there are all these conversations that we want to facilitate around.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for sitting with us.
My pleasure, yes.